Welcome! Today, I'm going to show you a selection of really cool historical photos. Real ones without staging. Let's go! Around 1900 in Port Chalmers, New Zealand, an 18-foot shark was dragged onto a wagon. That is longer than many small boats of the time, and the crowd treated it like a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. Warsaw Ghetto, Poland, May 1943. German soldiers marched Jewish civilians through smoke-filled streets after the revolt ended. The fighting began on April 19th and lasted nearly a month. In 1974, Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, and weeks later she appeared in photos holding a rifle as the group claimed she had joined them. New York, 1956. Police and reporters stand at the hidden burial site of one-month-old Peter Weinberger after a ransom abduction shocked the city. Investigators had begged for a 24-hour news blackout, but once the location was flooded with cameras. In 1931, the Hawke's Bay earthquake flattened central Napier, leaving streets buried in rubble and buildings burning. It killed 256 people, making it New Zealand's deadliest natural disaster. In February 1926, newspapers claimed an Osage man called John Stink had been declared dead years earlier and then reappeared, sparking back-from-the-dead rumors. The story spread fast because he reportedly had oil royalty money. In 1969, the Alice Cooper Group posed in Topanga Canyon at the ruins of a burned-down house with a towering custom Sun amplifier stack. That giant rig was built to stay loud on big stages. Austro-Hungarian soldiers scrambled up a near-vertical rock face using ropes and ladders, hauling gear by hand. In mountain warfare, cliffs like this were battlefields, and a single slip could erase a whole squad in seconds. On February 4, 1941, the United Service Organizations was founded to boost United States troops with shows, help, and a direct link to home. During the Second World War, it helped run thousands of club sites worldwide. July 1944, at Pipera Airfield near Bucharest, a Romanian Bf-109G sits under net camouflage to hide its outline from aerial scouts. Weeks later, Romania switched sides in the war, and aircraft like this suddenly faced a completely new enemy list. This P-38L shows the tail-warning radar antenna added under the right vertical tail to spot an enemy closing from behind. Pilots called it a rear-view radar, and it could trigger a cockpit light or buzzer when a fighter crept into attack range. In February 1954, Marilyn Monroe performed outdoors for United States troops in Korea, captured here on bright Kodachrome film. She did several shows in one day and drew tens of thousands of service members. Cortland, Nebraska, 1903. Linemen sit on a tall wooden pole packed with glass insulators for early telephone or telegraph lines. One slip meant a fall onto hard dirt because safety harness rules were still rare on jobs like this. In 1964, Haley Mills pressed her hands into wet cement at Grauman's Chinese Theater, joining Hollywood's most famous imprint wall. She became a Disney-era icon after winning an Academy Juvenile Award for Pollyanna. German prisoners of war picked grapes for the Widmer Winery in Naples, New York, turning a wartime labor shortage into a vineyard work line. During the Second World War, the United States held hundreds of thousands of Axis prisoners. Josephine Bois de Chêne, known as Madame Clofulia, was a Swiss performer born in 1829 with hirsutism, and she reportedly had a visible beard by age 2. She toured Europe giving songs and talks about her life. Okinawa, 1945. A United States Marine from the 6th Division uses a flamethrower to clear hidden positions in rough terrain. The battle lasted about 82 days and became one of the deadliest fights of the Pacific War. Christmas Day, 1969, in Quang Ngai, South Vietnam. A soldier dressed as Santa fires a 105mm howitzer. The costume was pure morale, but the gun could send a shell miles away, making this holiday photo feel unreal. At the 1993 opening of the Harley-Davidson Cafe in Manhattan, Donald Trump stands with Eric and Ivanka beside financier Jeffrey Epstein. The photo later resurfaced as a stark reminder of how tightly New York's VIP party circles overlapped in the early 1990s. Early 1900s at Trafford Park, Manchester. Rows of Ford Model T chassis line the floor as the factory scales up mass car production. The Model T became famous for being built so efficiently that its price kept dropping. Apollo 14 landed in the Fra Mauro Highlands on February 5, 1971, letting Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell explore the site Apollo 13 was meant to reach. They brought back 96 pounds of moon material. Madison Square Garden, February 20, 1939. Police on horseback wrestle a flag from an anti-Nazi protester as a German-American Bund rally turns into chaos. The night drew about 20,000 attendees. In the 1970s, one bystander walked straight into a Ku Klux Klan demonstration and physically disrupted it in front of cameras. The frame is a rare instant where the mask slips and the street belongs to the person who refused to be intimidated. In 1916, the first Pikes Peak Hill climb sent early race cars up a rough mountain road above Colorado Springs. Drivers fought thin air and steep drop-offs long before guardrails, making the finish line feel like a dare. Friedrich Paulus, commander of Germany's 6th Army, is filmed by a Soviet cameraman after the Stalingrad encirclement collapsed in early 1943. His surrender became a turning point because an entire field army was wiped out. Venice, California, 1939. Dancer Gwen Verdon poses in a figurometer, a beachside measuring board used to judge body proportions for pageants and publicity. She later became a Broadway powerhouse, winning multiple Tony Awards. In 1923 in Gothenburg, Sweden, Albert Einstein delivered his Nobel lecture to a packed hall after finally receiving the award for explaining the photoelectric effect. The prize was not for relativity, which was still debated. This is a special effects still from King Kong, where the Empire State Building steals the scene and the Chrysler Building is just a quick background cameo. The movie used miniatures and rear projection to fake impossible heights. 1989. A driver bails out of a battered derby car at the finish, captured by the University of Miami Library. The crushed doors and spray-painted warnings show how these events turn ordinary sedans into rolling armor in minutes. This is a jet-powered dragster called Green Monster, basically a giant aircraft engine on wheels with the driver sitting out front. These machines could hit extreme speeds in seconds, and one mistake meant the engine's full thrust was aimed straight through the chassis. Hungary, 1937. A woman undergoes an early chemical skin peel, advertised to fade freckles, with a rigid head frame and mouth tube to keep her still. New York City, 1960. A physician lines up a 2 million volt deep therapy X-ray machine at Francis Delafield Hospital to aim radiation at tumors below the skin. The huge rotating head let doctors shape the beam and spare more healthy tissue. Sukhumi, Abkhazia, 1992. Georgian soldiers pose with heavy machine guns beside a toppled bust of Lenin. The broken statue reads like a deadline, showing how fast Soviet symbols vanished as the post-Soviet wars exploded. The Japanese battleship Fuso sits in dry dock at Kure in 1943, dwarfing the workers along her hull. She carried 12 14-inch guns and 6 turrets, a firepower layout so extreme it looked like a floating fortress. Boys from elite British boarding schools scramble over a rough wooden obstacle, a classic character-building drill meant to harden teamwork and nerve. Places like Eton and Harrow trained future leaders as much with discipline and endurance as with books. Around 1943, Italian co-belligerent army troops fight alongside the Allies wearing British-style gear after Italy switched sides. Indianapolis, 1956. The pit crew swarms the Agajanian Special, tuning and refueling with bare hands and zero margin. One loose fitting could cost the race because these cars ran flat out for 500 miles. Near the end of the Second World War, an American soldier lounges in the bedroom of top Nazi leader Hermann Goering, turning a symbol of power into a souvenir photo. During the 1930s construction of the Golden Gate Bridge, a giant safety net hung under the deck to catch falling workers. It saved 19 men, who later called themselves the Halfway to Hell Club. Ellis Island in 1933 sits like a floating checkpoint in New York Harbor, with ferries and ships threading past the skyline. By that time, it had already processed millions of immigrants, making this tiny patch of land a gateway that reshaped the United States. This small schoolhouse in Ripon, Wisconsin, is remembered as the birthplace of the Republican Party, where an anti-slavery meeting in 1854 helped launch the new movement. Within 6 years, the party won the presidency with Abraham Lincoln. In the 1970s, Jimmy Carter is photographed shoveling peanuts on his Georgia farm, the job that shaped his plain-spoken image. When he became president, he had to sell the farm to avoid a conflict of interest scandal. February 14, 1942. Japanese paratroopers board a Mitsubishi Ki 57 transport before the airborne assault on Palembang, Sumatra. The target was a major oil and refinery zone, making this flight a high-stakes grab for fuel as much as territory. This is a rare late portrait of Chang and Eng Bunker, the original Siamese twins, taken in 1870, just before their final overseas tour. By then, they were farmers in North Carolina, with large families. This 1894 photo shows a mechanical prosthetic arm with leather straps and cables, built to replace muscle power with simple hinges and tension. It is a reminder that even in the Wild West, people used real engineering to get back basic grip and reach. Nashville, Tennessee, 1989. 19-year-old Tammy Middlebrooks appears in court as she pleads guilty in the killing of 14-year-old Carrick Majors. On the Galician front, a church was turned into a makeshift field hospital with straw on the floor and medics working between the pews. The contrast is brutal. A place built for prayer became an emergency ward within days. In the late 1800s in Connecticut, a steam locomotive overran the end of the platform and climbed halfway off the rails. Instead of fleeing, people lined up for a photo, because a wreck like this was rare enough to feel like a public spectacle. February 6, 1976, in Puerto Rico. Muhammad Ali plays along in a staged comedy bout, eyes off the opponent as the crowd laughs. It shows how Ali could turn even a fake fight into a headline moment with pure showmanship. Highland, Indiana, 1947. Ray Nichols works in his family shop on tiny midget race cars built for short-track speed. He later became an Indianapolis 500 crew chief, proving this cramped garage was a launch pad to the biggest oval in America. In the 1930s, Hershey's turned an ice cream truck into a rolling billboard with roof loudspeakers to pull crowds from blocks away. The painted price says 5 cents a pint, a reminder of how cheap a sweet treat once was. On February 5, 1919, Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith formed United Artists to keep control of their films and profits. It was a power move that helped break the studio grip. In 1962, in Tallahassee, Alabama, a grocery clerk rings up items on a mechanical cash register, long before barcode scanners. Every price had to be keyed in by hand, so speed and memory were part of the job. In 1925, a man casually reads the paper while a salon hooks him to an early perm machine with dozens of heated cords. These permanent waves could take hours, turning hairstyling into something that looked like a science experiment. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew 33.5 hours alone in the Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris inside this cramped cockpit. The main fuel tank blocked a forward window, so he navigated by side views. On October 24, 1901, 63-year-old Annie Edson Taylor became the first person to survive going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. She did it for fame and money, but the stunt left her bruised. In the 1930s, families packed their whole lives onto trucks and faced California border inspection stations like this one. These checkpoints tried to stop crop pests and controlled what could enter the state. London, 1936. Two women test the Wright-Craft scooter car, a tiny two-seat microcar with about 2.5 horsepower. It topped out around 15 miles per hour, looking like a toy next to a normal car, but promising ultra-cheap city travel. Chicago, 1951. Zenith workers build televisions on an assembly line, bolting in picture tubes and wiring by hand. Each set was basically a high-voltage radio with a giant glass tube, so factory skill mattered as much as the parts. In the 1960s, you could drop 5 cents into a coin-operated shoe shine machine and let it brush and polish your shoe automatically. It was early, self-service luxury, turning a street job into a gadget you could use in under a minute. May 1945 in Berlin. Volksgrenadiers emerged from a subway entrance to surrender, dumping rifles, helmets, and gear into a street pile. The underground became a last refuge in the ruined city. Washington, D.C., Union Station, 1942. A clerk searches a massive reservation card cabinet, flipping through thousands of paper records by hand. One misplaced card could derail an entire trip, which is why these systems were built like mini-libraries behind the counter. Boston, late 1800s to early 1900s. An Otis Chapman steam shovel bites into a cut, turning coal and water into pure digging power. Machines like this could replace dozens of laborers, speeding up rail cuts, sewers. February 4, 1962. U.S. Army, Piasecki, H-21C. Flying banana helicopters fly in formation, a workhorse used to haul troops and supplies in early Vietnam missions. One H-21 was reportedly the first American helicopter shot down there. Tokyo, 1980. Crowds pack Shinjuku Station to see Odakyu's new 7000 series train enter service. Its low, aircraft-like nose was designed to cut air resistance and noise, turning a commuter train debut into a citywide event. Before the National Park Service existed, Buffalo soldiers from the U.S. Army protected early parks, chased poachers, and built roads and trails as some of America's first rangers. Their patrols in places like Yosemite and Sequoia helped create the rules. Downtown Dallas, 1978. A high-rise crane failure ripped through multiple floors and left workers stranded above the damage. In 1914, a tug towed a 700-foot floating raft of chained logs about 1,200 miles from Oregon to San Diego. The load was estimated at 5 million board feet of lumber, basically a moving forest riding the ocean. Nuremberg, 1936. A rally platform faces a sea of perfectly lined crowds in a place built for mass spectacle. The modern view shows the same space nearly empty, a chilling reminder of how an ordinary field can once hold history at full volume. This old newspaper photo shows Robert "Red" Rolfe, a New York Yankees star, working as a car greaser at a New Hampshire gas station while waiting for a pay raise. Even as a world champion in 1940, he reportedly earned about $15,000 for the season. New York, 1929. A restaurant hangs a blunt sign, "No booze sold here," during Prohibition. The warning shows how businesses tried to avoid raids and trouble by making their rules loud and public. In 1898, a machinist uses a massive engine works lathe to turn a ship's main crankshaft journal for ship number 317, the Oceanic. The part is so huge the worker looks like a toy. In the early 1900s, the Follyphone was a parody instrument built by Louis Sidney to mock the hype around music of the future. Its absurd horns, pipes, and buttons were staged to look like high-tech genius, while the joke was that it was pure theater. In 1916, Charlie Chaplin stands beside Eric Campbell, the towering actor who became his most famous on-screen bully in silent comedies. Their size contrast was the gag engine, turning every shove, chase, and stare into instant slapstick. In 1947, Convair's Model 118 tried to be a flying car by attaching a removable wing and engine module to a road-going body. It never reached mass production, and one early test crash helped kill the dream fast. Los Angeles gangster Mickey Cohen poses in front of a wall of headlines, a man who treated publicity like armor. He survived multiple attempts on his life and even testified before a United States Senate crime committee. In 1956, Martin Luther King Jr. pauses on a beach as a couple snaps a quick photo, catching him in an ordinary moment between headlines. It is a rare glimpse of how fast he became recognizable nationwide during the Montgomery bus boycott era. In 1985, Michael Jordan poses near the Eiffel Tower in Paris, still early in his rise to global fame. The image captures how quickly basketball was becoming international, with a future icon turning a street crowd into a spontaneous arena. 1903. Exhausted riders reached the finish of the very first Tour de France, when the race was a brutal 6-stage loop, totaling about 2,428 kilometers. They rode through the night on heavy, single-speed bikes. In 1912, members of a German student fraternity crowd around a tripod camera for a mirror self-portrait, basically a pre-smartphone selfie. In 1978, Michael Jackson appears on Sesame Street with Oscar the Grouch, blending pop superstardom with children's TV. The crossover shows how massive his reach already was, even before his biggest album era. A British police officer wears a Mark IV or Mark V gas mask and a sign reading, "Have you got yours?" turning public safety into a street warning. Images like this came from an era when people expected poison gas in modern war, and governments pushed civilians to keep masks ready. In 1922, a sideshow photo pairs the world's heaviest woman with Major Might, sold as human extremes on one stage. In 1955, Jimmy Dean goofs between takes on Giant with Valley Keene, Elizabeth Taylor's on-set double caught by photographer Frank Worth. The wild part is the movie turned unknown faces into legends. In 1918, San Francisco opened the Twin Peaks Tunnel and sent the first streetcar through the mountain, instantly turning a slow hill, crossing into a direct rail link to the city's west side. Abby "Pudgy" Stockton poses on Muscle Beach, where she made women's strength training look normal decades before it was mainstream. In the 1940s, she was widely billed as the world's strongest woman. This 1915 photo shows Dar ibn Luqman in Al-Mansura, the house remembered as the prison where King Louis IX of France was held after his capture in 1250 during the Seventh Crusade. In October 1938, Charles Lindbergh visited Germany and was photographed receiving the Commander's Cross from Hermann Göring, a top leader of the German Air Force. Charles Lindbergh sits at center as he testifies in 1935 during the trial tied to his infant son's disappearance, with Richard Hauptmann at right in half profile. The trial of the century packed the courtroom. The Japanese battleship Musashi carves a hard turn through the Sibuyan Sea on October 24, 1944, throwing a white wake as American aircraft attack from above. This B-24 Liberator, called Black Nan, is caught in its last seconds over Lugo, Italy on April 10, 1945, with the left wing shredded by a direct flak hit after the bomb run. One blast between the number 1 and 2 engines turned the bomber into a fireball in midair. A 1920 textile workshop hums with rows of spindles and thread spools, where every bobbin has to match tension and count. One wrong setting could waste hours of work, so supervisors often stood right beside the machines to catch mistakes fast. This is the German light cruiser Königsberg in her namesake port, a city later renamed Kaliningrad after the Second World War. In April 1940, she became the first major warship sunk by air attack in port, hit by British dive bombers in Norway. Orthodox clergy pose wearing crosses and the Soviet medal for the defense of Leningrad in October 1943, a rare moment where faith leaders and the state shared the same wartime symbol. The medal marked endurance through the siege of Leningrad. A Soviet 122mm M30 howitzer crew works fast beside Krakow's Wawel Castle in January 1945, with Lieutenant A. Kuznetsov visible in the background. War correspondent Ernie Pyle sits with comedian Bob Hope, two men who shaped how Americans experienced the Second World War. one through Frontline reporting, the other through morale shows for troops. In February 1945, Red Army soldiers of the 1st Ukrainian Front marched past Krakow's medieval Barbican just days after the city was taken from German control. A woman sprints behind a penny-farthing rider, swinging a stick at the front wheel to make the giant bike pitch forward. The glass-negative blur is the giveaway that they were moving fast in the early 1900s. A wrecked German Tiger, one tank sits abandoned on a street in Częstochowa, Poland, as bundled civilians and soldiers stream past in January 1945. The heavy armor looks unbeatable up close, but it's burned. This mugshot shows a 19-year-old musician, later linked to a world-changing rock band, and it is often shared as a snapshot of pre-fame rebellion in 1986. The charge was tied to a spray-painted slogan, a tiny act that hinted at the louder voice he would soon have. Pat Moss, sister of racing star Sterling Moss, became one of rallying's toughest winners, and her partnership with Ann Wisdom turned long-endurance events into a two-woman machine in the 1950s and 1960s. On Saipan in 1944, American Marines pose with a captured Japanese bicycle, turning a battlefield find into instant transportation. The photo shows how anything with wheels became valuable when roads were wrecked and supplies had to keep moving. Near Boisinga in August 1917, Scottish troops at Pilcombe Ridge wade through liquid mud while Royal Engineers haul timber to throw a bridge over the Iser Canal. That waterproof sheet look was not style at all. It was survival gear in one of the wettest. On the Eastern Front in the First World War, Russian pilots wore fur-lined leather and full winter masks with goggles, turning them into near-faceless silhouettes in the cockpit. Up at altitude, open-air flying could freeze skin in minutes. French troops stand beside a rail line at Obozerskaya Station in Arkhangelsk Province on September 28, 1918, just before being sent north during the Russian Civil War. The piles of packs and helmets look like a moving town. In Korea in the summer of 1950, American soldiers march north in a thin line while civilians file past them heading south with everything they can carry. The same dirt road becomes a two-way river of fear and duty, split by a war moving in opposite directions. In Austria in 1934, Otto Planeta is escorted from court after being convicted for his role in the July Putsch and the killing of Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. He expected to be sent back to Germany, but he was executed just hours after the verdict. In 1975, Moroccan marchers and supporters from across the Arab world joined the Green March, a mass civilian mobilization aimed at pressing Morocco's claim over Western Sahara. Two men in military jackets pause for a meal during the first Nagorno-Karabakh conflict on December 21, 1992. The bowls, bread, and tired stares show how ordinary moments can still happen in the middle of a brutal fight. Brazilian Governor Leonel Brizola walks with an armed guard detail during the Legality campaign in 1961, a movement that rallied civilians and parts of the military to uphold the constitutional line of succession. In February 1926, Franklin D. Roosevelt poses on a Florida fishing trip with Oswald Mosley and Lady Cynthia Mosley, years before any of them became household names. The catch sprawled at their feet makes the scene feel like an ordinary holiday photo. In Moscow's gum department store in 1990, crowds gathered under a towering tree wrapped in letters and cards with banners reading "Merry Christmas, Moscow" and "Happy New Year, World." In Lake City, Colorado, in 1895, pack animals crowd a frontier supply store as miners move freight through the Rockies during the region's gold boom. That hand-painted sign promising groceries, cigars. A man identified as John Smith sits outside his home in North Carolina in 1937, a former enslaved person photographed within living memory of emancipation. That quiet porch scene is a direct human link between slavery. In 1998, Carla Faye Tucker became the first woman put to death by Texas since Chipita Rodriguez in 1863, after a notorious burglary case that drew worldwide attention. This photo shows a grave site in Medina that some traditions link to Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, the father of Prophet Muhammad. Many historic tomb markers in the city were later removed during redevelopment. As you scroll through these photos, drop a comment and tell me which one hit you the hardest and why. At Camp Saxton near Beaufort, South Carolina, newly freed black families gathered in around 1862 after Union troops took the area. The photo captures a turning point where freedom was not an idea anymore. In 1940, on the Western Front, a German artillery observer uses a tripod-mounted scissor binocular telescope to spot enemy positions from a trench line during the so-called Phony War. On February 1, 1960, 4 black college students launched the Greensboro sit-ins by taking seats at a segregated Woolworth lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Their quiet refusal to leave sparked a fast wave of copycat sit-ins across the United States. In 1966, Porsche simulated a front impact at 30 miles per hour by dropping Porsche 904 chassis 005 from a 10-meter height. Before Weissach had a dedicated facility, Porsche ran 72 drop tests like this. On June 22, 1940, Italian blackshirts posed in front of the Hotel Restaurant Riviera in Menton, southern France, after the city was occupied and the building was torn open by bombardment. This photo shows Jim Jones at Jonestown in Guyana, taken on November 18, 1978, hours before the community collapsed. More than 900 people, including more than 200 children, died after being given a toxic drink. In 1937, former stage performer June St. Clair demonstrates a step-by-step undressing lesson at the Allen Gilbert School of Undressing. The school sold this as a modern marriage skill. In Bucharest in 1986, people line up for cooking oil, a basic item that often disappeared from shelves in communist Romania. Long queues like this were driven by strict rationing and export-first policies that pushed daily shopping into an hours-long wait. Near Rzhev in May to June 1942, a small Soviet T-60 light tank operates alongside a KV-1 heavy tank marked Voroshilov from the 3rd Separate Guards Tank Brigade. During the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 to 1905, Russian prisoners of war are photographed inside the Dogo Onsen Hot Spring Building in Matsuyama, Ehime Prefecture, Japan. At El Alamein in 1942, Italian troops fire the Canonda 47/32, a light 47mm gun used against vehicles and field targets in the desert. Its small size made it easy to hide behind sandbags and shift fast. In West Virginia in 1938, a coal miner spends the evening outside a Warren Company house with his wife and children after a shift. Photos like this show how many mining families lived with bare yards, patched porches. A leather-jacketed young man poses on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle in 1956, a year when rock and roll was exploding into mainstream America. In 1937, on the Moscow-Volga Canal, this experimental propeller glider races over the water between the canal's new terminal buildings. Photographer Georgy Zelma captured the moment Soviet engineers mixed aircraft parts and boats to test fast travel. On May 10, 1945 in Germany, Soviet Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky meets British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery as Allied officers crowd around after the fighting in Europe ended. In 1962, in Middleburg, Virginia, President John F. Kennedy plays in the snow with his family dog Charlie. Kennedy used this Virginia retreat to escape Washington and meet allies and advisors away from the White House schedule. In 1898, T. Denhart poses in full frontier gear with a cartridge belt and a long gun, staged like a ready-for-anything tracker. Photographer Charles Wesley Mathers used a painted mountain backdrop. Japanese ground crew and pilots manhandle a Mitsubishi B-5M1, a carrier-based torpedo bomber designed to launch heavy torpedoes at ships. The cramped deck job meant folding wings, tight spacing, and fast teamwork to get the aircraft armed. On February 5, 1926, Chicago pirate radio DJs posed in costume beside a transmitter wall, joking about illegal broadcasting with the station name WJAZ. Backstage at Carnegie Hall in 1974, Keith Moon is photographed by Chuck Poulin while in New York to introduce his favorite doo-wop group, Sha Na Na. Moon was famous for turning introductions into a costume act. In February 1988, an Afghan Mujahideen fighter shoulders a Stinger, a portable air defense weapon newly supplied to the resistance, and tracks a Soviet aircraft over the mountains. The Stinger's heat-seeking guidance helped bring down low-flying helicopters and planes. In Hungary in 1944, a Soviet 122mm M30 howitzer fires from open ground with the 2nd Guards Mechanized Corps of the 2nd Ukrainian Front. Wounded in the Russo-Japanese War in 1904, he is photographed recovering in Japan in a Red Cross-marked hospital robe. After discharge, he crossed the Pacific by steamship to Canada and started a new life in Alberta. In Houston, Texas in 1944, a factory worker uses a dial gauge to check a long precision metal shaft as part of United States wartime production. The Kodachrome color makes the exacting inspection work visible. In November to December 1918, French gunners of the Siberian Colonial Battalion pose in Omsk with their artillery gear during the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War. In 1938 to 1939, IJN Special Duty Sub-Lieutenant Atarashi Motoshiro, a Kure 3rd SNLF platoon leader, is pictured mounted with field gear and a sword. Born in 1884, he was a reservist. In 1945, at Esselheide, Germany, freed Soviet prisoners of war hoist a United States 9th Division soldier after his unit liberated their camp. This photo shows Admiral William H.P. Blandy cutting a cake shaped like a mushroom cloud after Operation Crossroads, the United States test series at Bikini Atoll in 1946. The strange celebration was meant to sell the tests as a success. In 1924, Oxford bags became so wide that some pairs used as much as 39 inches of cloth per leg, turning student style into a walking billboard. Several venues tried to ban them, which only made the look spread faster across England. After the Great Chicago Fire in October 1871, about 17,450 buildings were destroyed, and roughly 100,000 people were left without homes. At least 300 people died. Sergei Krikalev launched to the Mir space station in 1991, and while he was in orbit, the Soviet Union collapsed, and his return was repeatedly delayed. He stayed in space for 311 days, landed safely, and later flew more missions. During his United States visit in 1959, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev toured the Empire State Building and was photographed on its observation deck with New York spread out below. The trip was packed with staged public stops like this. In October 4, 1944, in northeastern Greenland, United States forces seized the crew of the German Edelweiss II weather and radio station, an Arctic outpost feeding forecasts to the Atlantic War. The crew was taken prisoner after the landing force moved across rock. These Coast Guardsmen crowd into the frame, holding papers after the capture of the German Edelweiss II weather and radio station in northeastern Greenland on October 4, 1944. The outpost was feeding vital Atlantic forecasts. These Boy Scouts pose in a street demonstration wearing different styles of gas masks, showing how civilians were trained to protect themselves during a major war scare. The variety of masks, from simple face pieces to hooded designs. This unnamed Union soldier poses for a studio portrait during the American Civil War, gripping a cap-and-ball revolver that had to be loaded one chamber at a time with powder, ball, and percussion caps. During the Great Depression, an Ohio couple poses inside a bare room with a potbelly stove as the main heat source and almost no furniture. Photos like this documented how families rented cheap rooms, burned whatever fuel they could find. On February 5, 1926, a San Antonio newspaper reported that autograph books were passé, and young women were collecting friends' signatures directly on white kid shoes as a Valentine trend. On February 6, 1918, the United Kingdom passed the Representation of the People Act, giving voting rights to women over 30 who met property rules and adding about 8 million new women to the electorate. In the early 1900s, two Blackfeet warriors stand on a cliff edge looking across the mountains of what is now Glacier National Park in Montana. In 1873, the Kansas Pacific Railway's taxidermy department in Denver posed with a pile of bison heads and hides outside its shop. Railroad expansion and commercial hunting turned bison into cargo. On January 6, 1945, in Wiltz, Luxembourg, GIs Lloyd Spencer and James Bryson of Company B, 104th Infantry Regiment, 26th Infantry Division pause during the Battle of the Bulge with their rifles in winter gear. In Jakarta on December 6, 1975, United States President Gerald Ford and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger meet Indonesian President Suharto, photographed one day before Indonesia launched a major military move into East Timor. This is a 1909 Paris mugshot of Joseph Silver, a Polish gangster accused of running an international forced prostitution network across multiple continents. Investigators linked his business to corrupt local officials. On Friday, April 13, 1951, at Ebbets Field, Brooklyn Dodgers pitcher Ralph Branca poses in the dugout holding his Lucky Black Cat before a 7-6 win over the New York Yankees. On August 23, 1989, about 2 million people joined hands in the Baltic Way, forming a human chain roughly 600 kilometers long across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The date marked 50 years since the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. In London in 1926, volunteers from the Achille Serre Ladies' Fire Brigade drill with a hose in full uniform and helmets. The unit showed women training for emergency response years before most fire services would accept them as regular firefighters. On February 5, 1901, at Coney Island, crowds watch an early looping ride that flips riders upside down in a giant steel circle. These loop-the-loop attractions were built for shock value and were notorious for rough forces because the loop was a near-perfect circle. In 1914, Lifeguards cavalry brothers Mikhail Andreevich Katkov and Andrei Andreevich Katkov pose in uniform before heading to the East Prussia front. Both were killed on August 6, 1914, at the Battle of Cauchin. In the early 1900s in Michigan, a crew of laborers lines up outside a log cabin patched with tar paper, a cheap way to block wind and rain in rough camps. The hand tools, work boots, and even a child at the edge of the group show how entire families could be tied to remote jobs. On February 5, 1869, in Mollygool, Australia, John Deason and Richard Oates dug up the welcome stranger, the largest alluvial gold nugget ever found, weighing about 97 kilograms. On February 5, 1945, Japanese guards march out of Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila under a truce after releasing about 200 hostages from the education building. The camp held thousands of Allied civilians. On February 6, 1944, in Italy, near Monte Cammino, a Free Belgian commando handles an Enfield No. 4 Mark I T sniper rifle while serving with the British 8th Army. These Green Berets were trained for raids and amphibious landings. In 1937, at Sessa Hill, a coal miner cooks on a potbelly stove in a bare company room home, photographed by Louis Hine. Many miners like him were immigrant bachelors living alone because immigration rules. In the 1950s in downtown Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela spars on a rooftop with professional boxer Jerry Malloy, training at Malloy's Orlando gym to stay sharp and fit. He kept boxing through the treason trial from 1956 to 1961. The W. L. Robinson Dry Goods store in Avondale, Georgia sold dry goods, shoes, and groceries, advertising cottonseed meal and hulls right on the facade. The photo shows the pre-supermarket reality. one wooden storefront for clothing, food, animal feed. In 1915, actress Mary Pickford takes a break on set while dressed as Fanchon the Cricket, wearing a peasant-style costume made for silent film close-ups. The outfit and outdoor location hint at the era's fast, natural light shoots. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt was aboard RMS Lusitania in 1915 and gave his life jacket to a young mother and her baby when the ship was hit and lifeboats were running out. He could not swim, and he was lost at sea with his body never recovered. On February 4, 1941, the United Service Organizations was formed to run shows and support centers for United States service members during World War II. It brought several major charities under one banner, then sent performers. Austro-Hungarian troops of the Isonzo Army rush a machine gun team through an icy lake ford, while shells burst on the hillside behind them. In the 1977 National Football Conference divisional playoff at the Los Angeles Coliseum, Vikings defensive tackle Jim Marshall is photographed covered in mud during the game fans still call the Mud Bowl. In 1926, the Delta King is launched, the sidewheel riverboat built for overnight runs between Sacramento and San Francisco. The long hull and paddle wheel design were made for shallow rivers, where speed. After the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the ferry building's clock tower stands behind blocks of collapsed masonry and burned-out shells along the waterfront. The quake and the fires that followed destroyed huge parts of the city. In World War II, Brazil's expeditionary force in Italy adopted the nickname Smoking Snakes, after a joke said it was more likely for a snake to smoke a pipe than for Brazil to go to war. Their shoulder patch showed a cobra with a pipe. During World War II at the South Metropolitan Gas Works on Old Kent Road in London, a coke heaver shoulders a huge sack of fuel used to run gas production and industrial boilers. The job was brutal manual labor. In 1914, a GMC electric truck pulls a heavy freight train of wagons, doing work that would have required at least 8 draft horses. Early electric trucks were prized for stop-and-go hauling because they delivered full torque from a standstill and needed no stable, feed, or rest breaks. In late July 1916 on the Southwestern Front, Russia formed a special fighter group from the 2nd, 4th, and 19th Corps Aviation Detachments, later known as the 1st Combat Aviation Group, led by Ace Alexander Kozakov. In 1936, at the Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Teiji Honma guarded Japan's net, wearing an early face mask at a time when most goalies played barefaced. That simple cage-like protection shows how fast the sport was changing as shots got harder. On March 25, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City killed 146 workers when flames trapped people on the upper floors of the Ash Building. The disaster drove major changes in fire safety rules. In 1913, Hull House in Chicago was flooded for weeks by crowds chasing the devil baby rumor, a story staff repeatedly denied but could not stop. Jane Addams later wrote that the legend spread through immigrant neighborhoods so fast that people arrived by the hundreds demanding to see the child. Catherine Dior, sister of designer Christian Dior, was arrested in Paris in 1944 for her work with the French resistance and deported to Nazi camps, surviving to return home after the war. Christian Dior later named his first perfume Miss Dior after her. In World War I, some French troops tested the Adrian body armor kit, a steel cuirass worn under the tunic paired with a small hand shield for trench fighting. It was meant to stop shrapnel and pistol rounds at close range, but the extra weight. On September 10, 1956, at Semipalatinsk, the Soviet Union set off a 38-kiloton nuclear test during a live military exercise and then landed troops by helicopter in the blast zone 43 minutes later. 27 Mi-4 helicopters delivered 272 men. On February 2, 1959, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson played the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, during the Winter Dance Party tour. Hours later, they boarded a small plane after the show and were killed in the crash. The Adventures of Tugboat. Annie was a syndicated sitcom that ran for 39 episodes, starring Minerva Uricall as widowed tug captain Annie Brennan of the Narcissus and Walter Sandy as rival captain Horatio J. Bullwinkle of the Salamander. Around 1898, Grand Duke Alexei of Russia rides in a landau pulled not by horses, but by an electric landau tractor, an early motor unit designed to replace a team. The photo shows the weird in-between era of transport. On September 7, 1949, a young Hollywood actress attends the Ricketts Club as a paid companion for a rising actor, an early side job before her screen career took off. In 1992, during the Transnistria conflict, a soldier plays a garman while armed men and military vehicles sit nearby, mixing routine life with a frontline checkpoint. The garman is a button accordion common across the region. In 1898, crowds pose on a world's largest tricycle, built as a rolling publicity stunt, with wheels towering over the riders. Its giant spoked rims show how the bicycle craze turned into spectacle. Hideki Hachisuka's Typhoon Japan from 1979 captures a funnel-like vortex twisting down from a storm cloud over the sea as people on the beach watch in silhouette. The calm foreground against that black column makes the scene feel unreal. Subscribe so you do not miss the daily set of real historical photos.